First of all, he will deal with the opposition, a passage that indicates that, Colossians 2:15. When he had disarmed the rulers and authority, he made a public display of them, having triumphed over them through him, through Christ, the second Adam. So the work of the cross and the work that will be accomplished ultimately at the second coming will begin to regain the sovereignty over the earth that was lost and forfeited by mankind. Hebrews 2, 7 and 8, which is a passage that quotes out of the Psalms. You have made him a little while lower than the angels. This is referring to Christ. You have crowned him with glory and honor and appointed him over the worlds or works of your hands, and you have put all things in subjection under his feet. In other words, you have given him sovereignty over all things. Now that sovereignty goes beyond the earth, but it includes the earth and it includes the creation mandate. So that's one passage as well. Including Satan himself, 1 John 3:8. The one who practices sin is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning. The Son of God appeared for this purpose, to destroy the works of the devil. So he will take the next step and regain that sovereignty. And then 1 Corinthians 15, verses 24 through 27. Then comes the end. This is even after the millennial kingdom, when he hands over the kingdom to the God and Father, who has abolished all rule and all authority and all power, for he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. So he is going to conquer. He is going to exercise sovereignty over spiritual beings and in fact begin the process of restoring the earth at his second coming. The last enemy that will be abolished is death, for he has put all things in subjection under his feet. But when he says all things are put in subjection, it is evident that he is accepted who put all things in subjection to him. That's the Father. See the idea of subduing? So Christ will subdue again, in this case, the enemies of God, and will in fact reestablish sovereignty over the earth. And then the earth will be restored as described in several passages. Let me just read one. There's several in the Old Testament. Isaiah 11, 6 through 9. This is the passage where it speaks of the wolf lying down with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat. In other words, nature is going to be radically transformed as a result of this sovereign control of the second Adam, or the Lord Jesus Christ. And the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little boy will lead them. This is totally contrary to the world we live in today, a change in nature again. As a result of the second Adam. And the interesting thing is we as believers now will reign with him. In other words, we will regain that sovereignty. 2 Timothy 2:12, if we endure, we will also reign with him. If we do not deny him, he will not deny us. Or Revelation 24, where it describes that reign in the millennial kingdom for 1,000 years. So that's a little bit of the history of the mandate. We are in between, although the second Adam has been victorious on the cross, we are still not ruling like Adam and Eve had opportunity, but that will be a future ruling. So that's the creation mandate in history. So what are some of the implications of this? And there's some far-reaching ones that I'd like to focus in on. So let's talk about the first implication. First of all, it's through this mandate that we begin the whole concept of revealing the glory of God. And when we speak of the glory of God, I think the Bible speaks of the full character, the full nature of God as he has revealed it. Now, there's aspects of God that we will never know or never see. But of what God has revealed concerning who he is, that nature I think the sum total of that is the glory of God. And there's several passages, if we had time I could show you. But I think when the Bible speaks of the glory of God and us reflecting that, it's reflecting something of who God is. Communicating to a lost world something of who God is. And it begins, I think, with this whole passage, with the creation mandate. We do it, obviously, we said through families, raising up godly families, and then reproducing ourselves in godly children that reflect something of who God is, who utilizes the resources that God has provided and the talents that He's given to reflect something of His character and His nature. And then the second aspect as well, in terms of sovereignty, we can still do a lot in that area, and I think unfortunately the church and believers have somewhat allowed the world to almost have greater influence in this creativity area in all realms. And I think we need to restore that whole aspect, and that's what I'd like to get into here. Secondly, this creation mandate, I think, first of all, in the subduing idea, provides a framework for science, knowledge, and technology. And again, we've kind of relegated that to the secular world. We've let the secular world kind of set the agenda there. And we as Christians have kind of backed off. And it's good to have, for example, a Christian school that emphasizes a biblical worldview. That is severely lacking because we have neglected those areas as believers, unfortunately. We can do something in the area of regaining that. So it provides a framework for science and knowledge and technology. So it involves the whole research area. We should be at the cutting edge because we are studying. When you get into science, you're studying what God created. You're studying God's creation. So we should be the first ones in those areas. And the sky is the limit in terms of what we as believers should be involved in. The creativity of Christians can be displayed, and we can reflect the creativity of the Creator. So that's the second implication. A third implication, I think this also tells us that, and the text indicates that, everything originates from God. Everything comes from His blessing, His bestowal. And I'm going to give you some areas that maybe you haven't even thought about in terms of what comes from Him. Because sometimes when we grow up in a secular culture, and most of us are educated in state school, we don't get a biblical idea in terms of education, in terms of even the sciences. We end up with a secular viewpoint of all things. And let me point out a few examples here of what I mean by all things originate from Him. Not just the creation that is described in Genesis 1, but all concepts, all ideas, all thoughts originate from Him. Now, He's given them to all of mankind, believer or unbeliever, but we should capitalize on it, even more so than the unbeliever, because God has called us to be His children. So all originate from God. So He's the source, because He's the creator of all things. He's the source of all things. And when we talk about Him being the source of all things, generally we think materially. In other words, He's the source of the universe. He's the source of the planets. He's the source of animals. He's the source of the earth and the separation of the water. All the things in day 6. But there's other things that are implied in that as well. For example, there are separations that are mentioned. The separation of light and darkness. Separation of waters. Breaking down into categories. So when you think in terms of not just the physical entities, God has created categories for thinking. And He structured our minds in such a way that we think in terms of categories. We think in terms of putting things into categories and describing actions and ideas in terms of these categories. So all of these ultimately come from Him. So all categories are derived from Him. So I would put all categories of knowledge in that. In fact, even including ideas like logic. So when you come to the Scriptures, you want to have a biblical worldview in terms of all categories. Mathematics is not neutral. In fact, there's some books out that I think some of you would be interested in that says that mathematics is not something that is over here, kind of separate and distinct from God, and then there's spiritual and religious things over here. But if everything comes from Him, then the whole concept of mathematics has to fit in somehow into a biblical framework. So mathematics, logic are all derived from Him. In fact, this idea came from Charlie Clough, who was here earlier this summer on another subject, but one of the topics that came up in that class that he was teaching was this concept of logic. Where does logic come from? Well, it didn't come from Aristotle. Now, he has an Aristotelian logic, but it's not necessarily a biblical logic. It is different. In fact, he made a strong case to argue that actually there's a different logic that the Bible actually presents, and logic actually is derived, and some categories are derived from the Trinity. In fact, there's a Trinitarian logic. In Aristotelian logic, 1 and 3 are totally incompatible, but we have something very, very different operating within the Trinity. We have to think beyond what we are trained and, in fact, accustomed to oftentimes in these categories. That's just one example of how all the categories that we think in. So all the categories that you think in terms of science, all the categories that we think in terms of every aspect of our culture, we need to approach it from a biblical perspective, because all things are derived from the Creator. Now, we've seen that throughout Genesis, but I'm just expanding it here further, because now with this creation mandate, we have this whole area of technology, the whole area of harnessing the earth. So He is the standard for all things. So He is the standard for numbers. In fact, He also made the case that a strong case for numbers being derived from the Trinity. There's the idea of oneness, and there's the idea of the many. And philosophically, he makes the point that philosophically, there's always this tension between the one and the many, and the whole concepts ultimately are derived from this idea of a Trinity. So think in terms of all categories coming from Him, and He is the standard of all of them. So we measure them. We should be measuring categories in terms of what Scriptures teach. So we evaluate everything by His Word, what He has revealed. So when you come to mathematics, you need to think in terms of what does the Bible teach about mathematics? How is it derived from God Himself? Because all things ultimately come from Him.